All right. Well, this is nowhere near as slick as doing the whole presentation on an actual 64. We're gonna have to deal with Microsoft PowerPoint and a MacBook Air, Pro here, but we use the technology we have available. This wouldn't be a proper PowerPoint without an agenda. You can tell I've been in the corporate world a little bit too long. I'm gonna give you a quick introduction. Hello, come on in. And we're going to talk about what the 8-bit index is, but it's going to be brief because it's not the most interesting thing to talk about in this hour. I'm going to take a whirlwind tour through all the magazines that we have cataloged. I'll show you some fun stuff, little novelty things that I've learned in my researches, talk about a couple of interesting restoration projects, and then wrap it up. But there'll probably be time for one more story. At least I hope there will. So, quick introduction, and we'll make this very brief. My name is Myles Skinner. I have a doctorate in music theory, which is not a very practical degree at all. And I did not make it in academia as an academic music professor, so I started freelancing. I connected with a company called PartnerPath in my early programming career. Got to work with a whole bunch of very interesting companies as a result. You may recognize a well-known computer company there named after a fruit. Next to them, a small online banking service called PayPal. I really wonder how they turned out. Actually, they were great to work with. These days, I work with the Infotech Research Group. I do machine learning and language models and all sorts of AI adjacent stuff. It's sort of the hot thing right now. Back in the day on Usenet, I was the GEOS contact guy for comp.sys.cbo. I haven't had an email about GEOS in about 30 years. So I also looked after the North American BBS list up until about 1997. At the time, that was more sort of a process of dismantling it every month, crossing more numbers off the list. And then it got taken over by Oasis Commodore, I think, at the time. And I'm not sure. Now it's, of course, completely obsolete. But those are my CBM creds. But let's talk about the index. What is this thing? We're here to talk about magazines, really. But in the early to mid 90s, it was 1994, we started to get some news. Commodore's in trouble. Commodore Australia, no more. Commodore set to liquidate. Right? Remember, 1994, this is what happened in April. At the time, I felt really compelled to start preserving stuff. I had no idea that we were going to have online archives of the sort that we have today. So I was scouring used bookstores and garage sales and classified ads, if you remember those. I took a Greyhound to Markham, met someone in his garage in a stack like this, and they somehow figure out how to get his documents back on the bus. So his books and magazines and everything else. I was really quite into it. We had sort of bragging contests on Usenet about whose library was bigger, and I won. I'm sure there are bigger libraries out there, but mine was pretty sizable. So these are some of the books, most of the books I've acquired. Of course, I bought one more today. Just can't leave these things without getting more stuff. But there were also magazines, and lots of them. Confused Gazette, Run, and a whole bunch I'd never heard of because I'd never seen them before. And when you have that much material, you kind of need a way to organize it. If I saw something that I thought I'd want to come back to, I made up little index cards. I printed this out. You can see it's kind of crooked. It's much harder to line those things up on the printer than you might think. It really is. Of course, this is a really time-consuming and tedious project. You have to really pick and choose. You pick the articles that you're really interested in, which of course really biases what you can like. Mad respect for librarians who used to do this kind of thing by hand as a full-time job. It is a tremendous amount of effort. So I have a couple of little boxes full of cards of articles that I thought were interesting, and I put them away for 30 years. Fast forward to today, well, I'm a developer, and we have the technology, and managing a large database is pretty trivial these days. We have things called ORMs, and we have good DBs. And so my preferred technologies, I really like Rails. It's my favorite framework. Postgres is the natural database to pair with it, and also happens to be my favorite. And so I have the whole thing running on Heroku, which used to be free. Thank you, Salesforce. It is not free anymore. It cost me $16 a month to run this thing. But anyway, I'm not going to talk too much about the technology or the development of the application. I don't think that's really the interesting story here. What I want to talk about instead is what exactly are we keeping track of in this database? First of all, well, there's articles, and that's a really broad category. That could be anything, interviews, tutorials, whatever. It's sort of catches most stuff. The type-ins, I'm going to catalog all the type-ins. Everybody remembers those. Some of them were in BASIC, some of them were in machine language, some of them were even in actually other languages, rarely enough. And reviews, so software reviews, hardware reviews, book reviews, those are all in the index. Now, what am I not doing? I'm not keeping track of editorials, letters to the editor, jokes, cute sidebars, those little fragment columns like Gazette had their hints and tips, Transactor called them bits, Run called them magic. That stuff absolutely deserves to be cataloged somewhere by somebody, but it is a massive undertaking. I'm not getting to it, at least not now. Little jokes, contest forms, all that sort of stuff, and trivia, articles that are just lists of trivia, except for Jim Brain's Commodore trivia, which is a remarkable set of documents. There's a couple of reasons. One is that he always said that it was his gift to the community at large, and I want to recognize that. Also, it represents a time when there's a rare bit of crosstalk between Usenet, the internet, and print media, which that window was very, very small. And it's kind of neat that it's there. And honestly, some of the discussions of the trivia answers, I mean, look at this on the right there. That is the discussion that arose from the answer from a trivia question. So back and forth with Jim Butterfield. There's more content there than there's in some articles in other magazines. So absolutely, we need to keep that in the catalog. So this is the landing page. Again, I'm not going to go too much into the weeds of how this thing is built. If you want to play with the search engine, you can find a permalink on my website, which is linked on the World of Commodore page. So let's play with it. There are a couple of sort of canned searches that you can use to get started. For instance, articles by Jim Butterfield. This particular search is Jim Butterfield's articles in the Transactor. And right at the top there is the article that was on that typed index card that I just showed you. If I click into that, that is what the index card looks like today. This is generated from the database. Some information about the article, that little blurb in italics is what Transactor says that we should know about it. And then the regular type underneath is my quick description of the contents of that article. On the left, there are a number of links. This one in particular, view issue. Well, if we've got the search engine, it's not very useful if we can't hyperlink to the actual document that it contains. There was a problem with this. I mean, there are lots of archives out there. Right? There's, C.S. Bruce, Craig Bruce has all the Transactors. All the Torpets and TPUG magazines are on the TPUG website. Commodore.ca has a whole bunch of magazine PDF scans, but they watermark them all. Not terribly happy about that. And then there are various archive.org sites just scattered around the net. It's an absolute mess. Trying to link to all of these things in a programmatic way it was just a huge problem. So credit goes to Ian Skinner, you may know on Discord as RMC, who took all of the scanned PDFs that we could find and created a large repository on archive.org in a very organized way. So here's just the beginning of the list. Each of the magazines. If you drill down into the specific directory structure, every single one of these things is in a predictable format. We have a slug, so Commodore World, CBM_world. We go to the year 1996. All of those are in a folder. In each file name, the slug, the publishing sequence number, and the publication date. If I have that information, then this card, view article, not just view issue. Because I now have a programmatic way. If I know the page number of a specific article, because the directory structure is 100% consistent, I can go straight to color coordination by Jim Butterfield in the last transactor. So if you find something you want, you can read it immediately, which I think is kind of neat. And altogether, right now, we have 4,503 articles in the database. Nice thing about PowerPoint is that my raster bars don't flicker. I figure this is about halfway done, somewhere between 9,000 and 10,000. You're just shy of halfway. So I've got a lot of information in there already, enough to make it useful, but there will be more. If we were still using index cards, a good weight of index cards, this would be a stack of cards over 9 feet tall. So, or one of those old wooden card catalog cabinets, several drawers worth of this.
How many feet of magazines?
How many feet of magazines? Oh my goodness. I'm not sure. I have three 3-foot shelves of like the display, and then 4 banker's boxes full of the overflow. But I haven't called out all the duplicates anyway. So let's take a whirlwind tour. We got 100 slides in this whole deck, so we got to move fast. First of all, the granddaddy of them all is Compute. This is a photograph of the first 12 issues. Compute started out life as a thing called the Pet Gazette. Currently, these are the only 3 scans of Pet Gazettes that I know of online. So if you have originals, talk to me and we'll get these things scanned and on there, because there's a lot of material there that will be lost to time otherwise. Compute itself was a very colorful magazine. It was aimed at hobbyists. It didn't just cover Commodore. It was Atari, even Texas Instruments, Apple, all the different computers. It spawned a spin-off called Compute 2, which was for single board computers. Became one, being the one most of interest to Commodore people. It only lasted 3 issues, and then its contents were folded back into the parent. But the most important thing, and the only reason that Compute is like the only non-Commodore magazine that made the list, is because it spawned the Gazette and it had a really tightly coupled relationship with it. The Gazette is sentimental favorite. I love this thing. This was the one that my local library had a subscription to. I read it as a kid. Greatly enjoyed it. It went from 1983 to 1990 as a standalone, and then just abruptly disappeared. Because Compute's parent company was divesting their assets, but Compute got bought, and the Gazette came back as a special 40-page section inside Compute magazine. Now here in Canada, I never had any problem finding this on the newsstand, the Gazette section inside Compute, but I guess in the States, it was subscription only, at least at some point. I'm not sure what the exact history is there. And then after a while, it made it up until the end of 1993, and it went disc only. So it just disappeared as a magazine completely, and managed another 14 issues after that. And we'll return to those in a bit. These are all of my Gazettes in the photograph. If you are looking to start a library of your own, Gazette is probably the most realistic that you would be able to get complete. I mean, circulation numbers were easily 500,000 million at its peak. There are lots of them out there. Easy to find, except for maybe the very first year's worth, or 6 issues of the first year. Those can be a little tricky to track down. All right, this one, Transactor, another fine Canadian publication, started as a newsletter bulletin type thing produced by Commodore, eventually went independent. It ran from 1978 to 1989, 65 issues altogether. This is a tech journal, a little dry for casual reading, but the content is amazing. Programming, hardware projects, just all the sort of thing. It is definitely worth checking out even today. I also lived down the street from where they had their Buffalo address for a couple of years, but that was long after they were gone. It's just an ordinary apartment building, nothing special there. Run magazine. This one arguably may have been better than Gazette in terms of its content. It's just not as much fun. But Run went from 1984 to 1992, so there were 94 issues in that time, and 5 specials, so there's a lot of them. Tour Pets. Technically not a magazine, but it became a magazine. So I've indexed all the tour pets. It started out life as the TPUG newsletter. Very quickly grew. There is kind of a complicated history here. The publisher, Bruce Beach, and TPUG kind of had some disagreements about what the focus of this thing should be. There was a lot of club or user group content, because of events, and there were articles that would refer to things that only would have made sense to the people who were there. So, 40 years later, it can be a little bit hard to follow what was going on. So they had a disagreement, and the tour pet split. And TPUG came up with their own magazine, which went for another 25 issues. And that is a much slicker publication. There's some really good stuff there and some local history. So it's very interesting for that reason. Tour pet kind of limped along without TPUG for a couple more issues. And then rather strangely, it rebranded as an amateur oceanography journal. Of all things. Yeah, for real. Yeah, Beach is kind of an interesting guy. We won't get into now, but there was a documentary in the works about his life. I think there's a Facebook page about it if you're interested in finding more. And so this was totally supposed to be a photograph that pandered to the hometown crowd. However, I didn't realize that I am missing number 7. I have like 2 almost full sets that I've purchased recently, and they were both missing number 7. If you have one, we need to talk.
Check the box.
I have lots of really nice quality gazettes if you're interested, by the way. I'm not affiliated with the vendor, but they're out there. Go get them. Ahoy, this was a fun one. It went for a good 61 issues. They used to brag that they were the best looking of all the Commodore magazines. They really weren't. Their layout was terrible. Their articles were scattered across pages. You'd find continued on page 86, and you flip to page 86, and there'd be half a paragraph wedged between a couple of ads, continued on page 94. It's just, mind you, if you're interested in programming challenges, the Commodore's column is really worth checking out. And just setting a puzzle for the readers. Not all the Commodores got answered before this thing folded. Info 64. Eventually to become Info. This is the best review magazine out there. It started out as a handwritten newsletter, Cyborg Gazette, and eventually turned into a real magazine. Ben Dunnington produced this basically in his bedroom on an actual 64. It eventually moved on to add Amiga coverage, and it was all produced on Amiga. They were very proud of that. These people had integrity. Their reviewers could not be bought, and they absolutely refused to advertise for things like lottery number pickers. They basically just outright called it a scam. They also reviewed the other magazines at the time, which was brutal. There's sort of a point at which Compute ceased to be a fun hobbyist magazine and just became yet another boring PC business mag. And so Info, they said of Compute at one point, if they're aiming for consistency, they've achieved it. So they did not pull any punches. This is the Commodore newsletter of the Pet Users Club, which eventually rebranded as Interface, which later bifurcated. There were 2 magazines. This is Commodore's in-house publication. Commodore Microcomputer was the serious business side. Commodore PowerPlay for more entertainment things, not just games, but they eventually merged into Commodore Magazine, which made it as far as 1989, and then just sort of vanished without a trace. I miss Commodore's magazine. The reviews read like ads, and most of the articles read like press releases. That's just the nature of it. There were some really good basic tutorials in the early days, some programming things, so it was good for that, but for the most part, not the highest quality content. Well, speaking of not the highest quality content, this is an odd one, Commander Magazine. I'd never heard of. It ran from 82 to 84. As far as we know, only 17 issues, one of which was a double. We're not sure whether it stopped publication, and there's an 18th one. There were rumors. If you know of one, let me know. It's really inconsistent, slightly amateurish. This oddball, strictly Commodore from Western Canada, was announced with great hoopla in all kinds of computer hobbyist magazines. As far as we know, there are only 2 issues extant. The first one is really, when you open up that cover, it's just typewritten inside. The second one is much more slick, but it definitely is very much an amateur publication. But it's out there, so we indexed it. GeoWorld, some people would call this a newsletter. I think it deserves to be called a magazine. This is one of the best GEOS dedicated publications out there, and completely produced using GEOS. But I mean, the authors of the Hughes brothers wrote there, and Susan Lamb, and William Coleman, and the big names in the GEOS world. So I think it deserves to be recognized. Die Hard, one of the last Commodore magazines to give up the ghost. Started as a newsletter, bulletin, whatever you want to call it, flyer, I think he actually called it. Printed off 10 of them, went to sell them to the local user group for $1 a piece, sold them out. I'm sure more of them got printed because they are out there. Grew up into an actual magazine. A little bit busy. The typesetting is not the most professional, but I have a kind of a sentimental soft spot for Die Hard. It's a lot of fun. The other magazine that managed to make it into the 90s was CMD's Commodore World. Unlike Commodore's magazines, these did not read like advertising. I mean, yeah, there were articles about CMD hardware. I mean, how could there not be in the mid-90s? But there was news from around the world. They covered the Commodore's liquidation and bankruptcy proceedings. There were Jim Butterfield's probably definitive word on relative files. He'd been writing about them for years, but his series of articles in Commodore World, I think he finally nailed it. It's a complicated topic, but he made it easy, as he always did. The typesetting, again, can be a little busy. This is really just some of the worst 90s excess of layout design. And that on the right there, unretouched, is sort of medium gray text over a light gray background with extra graphic whatevers. Yeah, it's not always the most accessible in terms of visibility. Interestingly enough, there was a Spanish magazine called Commodore World that I know absolutely nothing about, but it ran for quite a while. It's not related in any such way, but it was just an interesting thing that I turned up. All right, moving on. Just some fun observations. There's a lot of stuff in here. Like, for instance, there was a lot of advertising for copy software. I don't know if you can see what's wrong with this particular ad. I mean, they were always very careful to say that we are not, we legitimate backups. We're for legitimate backups. Maybe you can see it now. Yeah. Oops. I think they meant condemn.
Yeah.
Right, to condone is to tacitly approve of questionable activities. So maybe they did mean it. Maybe it was just a slick, it was an intentional mistake. I don't know. This answer to a question in Commodore magazine, the 6502 can only address about 65. Why so imprecise? Does that sound better than 64? It's just very strange.
Must have been somebody on the ISO or the not ISO, the metric committee.
Oh, yeah, okay. This review from the very first, the premier issue of Compute for 3 word processors, one of which was called Word Processor, one word processor program, and Word Processor, a bargain at 1995. That's because in 1979, naming things had not yet been invented. It's fun to see predictions too. Info absolutely nailed this one. In 1988, they said they'd like to see an online service, inexpensive, quick, easy to use, that would provide access to most of the world's information. We didn't have this, but this is Google, this is Bing, this is DuckDuckGo.
Was.
Well, let's not get into that right now. I still believe in the internet. I know. And as I'm going through these magazines, I'm always trying to make corrections. So there are bad scans, there are missing pages, torn pages. Sometimes they're upside down, or they're out of sequence, or they're duplicated. This one actually is not duplicated. I thought it was at first. You look more closely. To see what's going on here, I'm going to back up a page. All right, flipped, activates Axon Flight Simulator. And we flip through the pages. And yeah, that was an ad. It was just very clever. That was a really, really clever use of the medium. I think too, we're talking about type-ins. This is a whole other topic that's definitely worth thinking about, but sometimes there are professional programmers who submitted these things. Sometimes they work for the magazines, but look at this. Freshman at college, Lake County, so not a professional. 10th grade high school student, right? These are all coming from 1988 issue of Run, just arbitrarily picked that year. Freelance writer with interests in educational and home applications. A physician and amateur programmer. Retired Naval Chief Petty Officer. Air traffic control instructor. A carpenter. I mean, he was prolific. You check him out on CSDB. Tony Branner wrote a lot of games. A microbiologist, a clergyman. I love this one. Probably the only Commodore programmer who has great grandchildren. This is amazing. This is just a sampling of people who were published in Run Magazine type-in. I mean, this I could wax nostalgic about this forever, but I mean, not everybody can be a programmer, maybe, but programmers can come from anywhere. So let's talk about restoration. So this is kind of aside from just the research aspect of things. We're trying to preserve, we're trying to clean things up, organize. So I do a lot of lateral reading, research. I'm going to find out what's going on, trying to get whatever information I can. Sources are sketchy. For Die Hard, I actually found Brian Crossway's website. He was the editor-in-chief, so that was a very useful primary source. Those are all the diehards that I have, 23 of them. I saw this news bite. Issues 24 and 25 and posted. This is interesting, but there are only 23. What's going on here? So obviously, I had to check it out. Yeah. On the same site, there were supposed to be JPEG scans too. They were typeset and GeoPublish. He had JPEGs that were converted from GeoPaint. It's a bit lossy, kind of hard to read. They cut off the bottoms of every page. Also, 404. Well, we have the Wayback Machine. The internet does not forget anything. I had to find my way through Tripod archived site, which led me to an Angel Fire site. Angel Fire? And I found them. I found all of these JPEGs, every single page. And they're a little bit bumpy. You can see it's not easy to read the text, but I did reconstruct all of these into a image. I cannot tell you who the author is of that article there. That dialogue text box, mysterious, the type-in programs. This is fatal for a type-in program. At the bottom, the lines cut off. Who knows what that was? But I set them all up. We added them to the archive. I sent Brian a note, said, hey, I reconstructed your magazines and I put them up online. Are you okay with that? He sent back a heart emoji. So I think that's approval. I didn't hear anything more from him for a while. 6 months later, he sent me a download link and said, oh, by the way, I have the PDFs you were looking for. So now I can announce here at World of Commodore that there have been 2 lost issues of Die Hard published. Number 44 and number 25. Go and check them out. They're a lot of fun. You can see the improvement in the quality. So they're pre-proof. They're pre-publication proofs. So they're placeholders for ads and things of that nature and other graphic elements. But that's how they sit. They're completely readable and indexed in our database. And we could reconstruct those ads and reimagine what they would look like had this actually been published. I didn't do that because it's sort of tampering with historical documents, but it's kind of fun to think this is what could have been. There was another major reconstruction project that I carried out. I was only doing print stuff. I didn't want to deal with disc magazines. There are 200 and I don't know how many Lodestars. I just don't have them. There's so much. But the Gazette disc, there are only 14 of them. And I wanted to maintain continuity with the print Gazette. So I felt I have to deal with this stuff. Fortunately, there was a print version. It's been circulating since 95 or so. A guy called Chris Ryan, who I was able to get in touch with, told me he printed them out on his Panasonic 9-pin printer. And he made covers in, I keep wanting to say Photoshop, but it's not, the print shop. It's for each one of them. And they've been kicking around the net forever. You can see the quality's not great. There are what we call Xerox pucks. There are a lot of photocopying artifacts. At some point, there were holes punched and those got photocopied. The pages were all handwritten, and they're a little tough to read. I mean, I love that these things exist, but they weren't the greatest things. The OCR that we use to pull the text just cannot understand that 9-pin font at all. It just makes a mess of it. So I decided to take on the task of pulling the text out myself. The whole story is on my website if you're interested in more details about it, but I decided to keep Chris Ryan's covers as sort of a nod to the work that he put in, but everything's nicely typeset. So that's the same page facing now, and kind of like a modern, just done in Microsoft Word. But that enabled me to restore the mastheads, which weren't actually on every disk, so everybody could get credit, including Chris Ryan. You know, table of contents, it's really hard to link to an article if you don't want to know what page it's in, so I had to sort of come up with an appropriate pagination. You know, if there are little programming snippets in there, on the left, you can see some basic. On the right, you can see some disassembler. At the bottom, you can see some symbolic assembler. It's from a good article by Jim Butterfield there. I could add screenshots that they just were not present on the disk, so it gives it a little bit more life. The December 1994 issue had the whole Christmas demo, so I just screenshotted a lot of it. I like this. This just looks nice. You could print this out and have this as a physical document if you wanted, the whole magazine, all 14 of them. And the ads, there were ads. No one's ever going to see those ads, but I surfaced them here, screenshotted them. I was really disappointed that there wasn't more Petsky with that telephone. That's about it. Mostly they were just walls of text. Very sad. There was a little lost opportunity there. So there they are. Those are the 14 gazettes. If you haven't seen them yet, go check them out. There's some really good content. Jim Butterfield was a regular contributor. Steve Vander Ark's columns and GS were pretty good. All right. I'm going to wrap this up. So these magazines, they're all gone. Every last one of them has ceased publication. 2 new diehards notwithstanding. And it appeared that they didn't see it coming. Info stopped covering the 8-bits. I think it was issue 31. So this is just, frankly, there wasn't enough content anymore. Not enough new products. Okay, fair enough. They went on to the Amiga. Became Amiga exclusive, managed to go for a little while longer. Their very last info, their editorial was sounding the alarm about migration from Amiga to PC, and then they vanished. But there were some patterns that this happened to all of them. Run, in its final issue, published the results of a reader survey. What do you want to see next? The same thing with the last standalone Gazette. The penultimate issue, reader survey, and they were discussing the results in here, and then gone. Now, they did manage to resurface, but still, they didn't know that the compute was gonna get sold, that they were gonna end up seeing the changes that they did. Transactor, final issue. Guess what? Preliminary results of a reader survey. What would you like to see in future issues? Oh, also, they had just hired a new assistant editor. They had no idea this was coming. Now, we know Die Hard died. They didn't make it past 23, but if they had, this would have been the last issue. Guess what? Reader survey. Also, they just hired a new assistant editor. It's nice to see them keeping up the traditions. So it is very sad. They just disappeared. The market couldn't sustain it. As we know, it got smaller and smaller. And now it's really niche. World of Commodore used to be like this massive trade show. And now it's jumping out there, but it's nowhere near as big as it was.
Oh, no.
There's a little bit more to this. They didn't all vanish without a trace. There was one that knew. It's really strange. Compute folded, and the Gazette disk actually kept going for a little while longer independently. Not very long. They didn't have a great circulation, maybe 3,000, 4,000, the best estimate I can come up with, but they knew. That's the editorial. The authors actually got to tie up information. They left contact information. They said, here's how you can find back issues. You want some of my previous articles? Find me on CompuServe or whatever, so they knew, including this guy, Mr. Fred DeGazio. I loved his columns in the Gazette. I read them as a kid and always enjoyed it. They were never technical, but they were always fun. He used to write about education, kids, computers. He went on to write about predictions about future technology. Sometimes it was quite wild. But at the end of his last article, he wrote, what did he wrote? If you really haven't had enough of me, then I invite you to write me. I will keep this column alive interactively through correspondence and email addresses, which bounced. I had to try. I felt compelled to reach across the day. So I did a little digging, and I turned him out. I found his address, and I wrote to him unsolicited. I mean, you got to be careful with parasocial natures of these relationships. I know way too much about him and his family from the columns, but I'm just some random on the internet. But anyway, I just said, hey, so you invited us to keep the correspondence going. So I'm just saying hello. And he like wrote back like, what was this about again? And I filled him in. It was 30 years ago, and he thought that was absolutely hilarious. He was very generous with his time, very gracious. We had a great conversation, and then he asked me about the research, and he said, well, I have this Wikipedia page. Is there any way your research could be useful for that? Well, I've got all these articles cataloged, not complete yet, but it's in progress. That's the actual link there to my stuff. I wrote an API that just lets you do a search, a simple author search, and it sends back all the data in a JSON, which you can embed on a website, format it however you like. So you go from Wikipedia to my bibliography, all of those links, of course, we know that you can go straight to the articles from there. So currently 93 articles, definitely incomplete, but it's not just him. We know this guy is utterly prolific. I currently have 168 Jim Butterfield articles indexed, and I am not done. He is not done. So that is...
I might disagree with that statement.
Mhm.
He died a few years ago.
Yes, I know, but I think in a way I realized that Jim Butterfield died. I regret that I never actually got to meet him in person. But I think by exposing this stuff, it sort of keeps these writers and their ideas alive. Because there is a danger that we will lose everything, literally. I mean, digital is not safe. Digital archiving, there are all kinds of problems to talk about there. Paper copies of things disintegrate over time, and what do we do? So I want to keep this stuff alive. And if the works outlive their authors, I think that's probably the best thing that they could hope for, to leave a legacy. So I zip through everything. Are there any questions?
Do you have contributors helping with all this?
I don't, other than Ian here, who's managing the archive. I am doing all of the cataloging myself, which is a long-term project. About 2 years so far. I've gotten 4,500 articles done, so it'll probably be done in a couple of years from now. If anyone wants to contribute, probably the best thing that you can do is follow the permalink and just hit this thing and let me know if you find any problems. Free QA, absolutely, I'll take it. But yeah, let's get rid of that cursor. That's annoying. More flashing. Yes, sir.
So you have OCRs of the magazines, like the actual every bit of the text, or is it just excerpts for each article?
Archive.org creates the OCRs, and I believe they are searchable using archive.org's tools, not through my index. My index is fully curated right now, so I decide. I've tagged articles with keywords that I think are important. I've tried to write descriptions that will hit. I would love to have a full text searchable. Full text search is either not very good or really expensive. So at the moment, like that's kind of what I'm doing at work. We're using Microsoft Azure to search through our tens of thousands of pages worth of research. And it's got things like, simple lexicographic search, which does matching words, but you can have it fuzzy search, which can accept misspellings. You can have semantic search, which kind of understands the meanings of the words. And then this exciting thing called vector search, which is really kind of a new, well, the idea is not new, but the technology that supports it is very much new, where it takes all of your text and it translates it into a matrix of incomprehensible numbers and determines by which numbers are adjacent to which other numbers, what would be close. So if you've got like a bad search, I would love to have all that. Maybe in another 10, 15 years, the technology will enable that. I'm thinking maybe a crappy full text search may be possible in the near future, simply because we do have that. We can import that into the database.
But to have the actual information, so for example, you find an article that has a type in, well, I want to copy.
Oh, yeah, you could go to it. You're gonna hope though that the OCR it's good, and it's gotten a lot
So
better.
is there a link from there, from the, to an OCR
Yep.
version?
Yeah, there
Okay.
sure is. So you can get the actual article, you can get the full issue, JPEGs produced of all of them if you just want to look at them. You can do the OCR. There are a couple of other formats in there that you can there's a set of links on the left side of each card. So yeah, if you want the text, full text, you can grab it yourself. Also, if you go out to the archive, you can torrent, download the PDFs from there directly if you want them. There are links to the text, OCRs, scan pages, all kinds of stuff. Archive.org it's a remarkable project, and by using them, we get a lot of bells and whistles for free. Right. Well, thank you.